Hey guys, we're here for our next session. It is very cool. So we have Jason Truppi, co-founder and CEO of PayDrop. He's a career technologist, 20 plus years, and also a former FBI agent. And he'll be doing a talk around crypto investigations. And to start, can you guys confirm in the chat that you can hear him? And Jason, do you mind just
Yep.
talking?
Can you guys hear me? I can't see the chat. I think I have the same issue. But can you just tell me if they're responding?
Yes, I'll give you a heads up. So it seems the chat is broken again. So what you guys need to do is if you can just confirm in the ask a question that you can hear us, it'd be appreciated.
Okay. Yep. I see it.
Yeah,
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, let's get started. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Jason Truppi. I've been in technology for 20 plus years. So I've had every type of job you can think of. I have a computer science background. Worked at a lab that was for the Department of Energy doing physics experiments. I was a system administrator, network engineer. I even worked on Wi-Fi systems, mesh systems, WiMAX, Wi-Fi for several years. But more notably, in 2007, I was recruited into the FBI, and that's where a lot of things changed for me in my life, obviously. Being an FBI agent, I was sent from my small hometown to New York City. So that was my first office of assignment. And, New York at the time, FBI investigations, cyber division existed, but they weren't really, fully formed across the Bureau. They only had, I think, 10 different field offices out of the 56 field offices that were operating, cyber investigations. And you kind of had these one-off, agents that had technology backgrounds doing intrusion cases and kind of cybercrime at the time. It wasn't really well coordinated. So when I was there, I actually landed on one of the first cyber national security squads. So this was a squad that was looking at countries like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, all the things you're seeing in the news of their governments hacking into private sector and critical infrastructure. We were working that back then. It was all very super secret. Now it's very public, obviously. But it was an interesting time because, the government was really adjusting their focus onto cyber threats. The government is always going to be behind the curve when it comes to technology and advancement. And we'll talk a little bit about that during the presentation. But they can ramp up and they can react very quickly. And you have certain pockets of the government where you have technologists like myself and several others where we could do more complex things. But even if the government as a whole really wasn't capable. Since the government, I've been outside. I've been doing entrepreneurial type work. I've started several companies, and now I'm CEO and co-founder of PayDrop, which is a payment system for the gig economy and gig economy workers. But let's go ahead and get started. You guys can see my first slide here. This is a picture. Let me just toggle my video here. This is actually a picture of J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson, about 1957 era. And he's got a little, got his little Bitcoin lapel there. So before we get too deep into some of the hacks and things and investigations from law enforcement, I think it's really important for everyone to understand, what the enforcement powers are and how they're differentiated. I get a lot of really interesting questions about what's the role of government when it comes to, cyber investigations or, just hacking and cybercrime and SEC filings and things like that. So I want to explain that a little bit here. There are kind of two different types of enforcement powers. So there's one which is, do you have arrest powers? And then the other one is kind of civil action. So that's really the big difference when you look at the FBI versus the SEC, for example. FBI has the ability for arrest powers. And what that really comes down to is there is a designation in the federal government called the 1811 designation. And any 1811 is any law enforcement officer that is a gun-toting, badge-toting agent. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be part of the FBI. So you have FBI, you have Secret Service, you have ATF, DEA, all the ones you probably see in TV shows and things of that nature. But what you don't know probably is that there are 1811 designated federal officers that work for organizations like NASA. So NASA actually has special agents that do counterintelligence work. You have NSA, same type of thing. You have, ICE, you have DHS, you have all sorts of other agencies that actually have the ability to enforce any law in the federal statutes. But the question is I always get the question is well, how does the government prioritize what they enforce between the agencies? And that's a really interesting and messy question. So I'll kind of dissect it where let's talk about the FBI versus Secret Service just quickly, because I think, again, this is really important to understand. FBI is a very unique organization where they have dual roles. So they have a role to protect the nation, the nation at large here domestically from espionage. So they have a counterintelligence mission, and then they also have a criminal mission. So it's very unique. Secret Service doesn't have that dual role. The Secret Service is primarily focused on, fighting against financial and payment system protection and crimes. They do not have necessarily a counterintelligence mission. And that's where you might find investigations where FBI and Secret Service might, work together on a particular case because there's different subject matter experts in this field. Going again to NSA or NASA, who's doing mostly counterintelligence work. ATF is doing, federal firearms investigations, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. DEA is doing drug investigations. But what you probably also don't know is that any one of those federal agencies can actually try and convict and arrest under any federal statute. So you can have, Secret Service doing cybercrime investigations. You can have DEA doing cybercrime investigations in some cases. And a lot of agencies are moving towards that because it's really just technology-enabled crime. We call it cybercrime, but realistically, it's crime is moving from the streets to the internet. And the penalties for hacking are much less severe than robbing someone in the street, for example. So I just wanted to kind of designate those are the federal agencies that have arrest powers. Now let's talk a little bit about Securities and Exchange Commission, because that's they have a really big influence in the crypto space, obviously. So they do not have arrest powers. So if you have watched the show Arrested Development, where they come in the first episode and they barge into a home and arrest the dad, that doesn't happen from the SEC. They can impose civil actions and administrative actions. So what that means is they can fine you, they can bar you from doing business, they can disgorge you, so they can take money that was created over illicit activity. They can impose sanctions and censures. So it's very similar to what Elon Musk got in trouble for a little bit. When he posted the $420 stock price for Tesla. That's what the SEC was going after was to fine him and then also potentially pull him from and barring him from doing business. So I just want to level set there. We can talk really, really deeply about the different agencies, but what I really want to get into is this really complex slide. And I know many of you can't zoom in here, so I'm really going to talk through this, and I'll make sure that I provide these slides after the fact so you can take a look at them. But what I've done here is at the very top, we're looking at basically the last 10 years of hacks into cryptocurrency, either exchanges or just kind of large hacks that have occurred over the last 10 years on the top. On the bottom and middle, you're seeing different law enforcement actions that I think are relevant to either virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies, or kind of other movements of law enforcement. And then at the very bottom, what I wanted to add here, because I think it's going to be really important when I go through this, is a list of some major hacks that have happened that are not cryptocurrency related, but are really important to kind of show where the focus was at the time for federal law enforcement. So let's just start with the far left here, top left corner. Everybody knows this hack that had happened. Mt. Gox in 2011 got hacked. They had about a $5 million loss at the time. I don't know what the equivalent of dollar loss would be now for the number of Bitcoins that were stolen. But in 2011, you have to realize that, government, I was tracking. So I was officially started in the FBI in 2007. The Satoshi white paper came out in 2009. Government really wasn't looking at cryptocurrency, quite honestly. They knew of it, they knew of the movement, and they knew that hackers and other illicit activity was happening over Bitcoin, but they didn't know. They couldn't really focus on it, and I'll show you why. So, if you look at the kind of middle there, you can look at one of the FBI's biggest criminal cases that was happening at the time. Was an operation called Operation Ghost Click. And what it was is a malvertising campaign. So it was a piece of malware that infected 5 million computers worldwide that was just replacing your ads for click fraud. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it was a massive intrusion. I mean, it was a huge bot network of computers that were replacing your Amazon ads, for example, for fake ads or to get better click-through rate. And there were multiple people arrested in Estonia. And so that was the type of intrusion case that FBI was looking at the time. They weren't looking at really sophisticated, cryptocurrency hacks like a Mt. Gox hack. But that also is because a lot of US citizens were being affected monetarily through fiat loss. And that's really what the government was focusing on. They didn't really feel at the time that Bitcoin was a real currency and didn't really have any stored value for the most part. At least that was my interpretation of how the government was feeling of it at the time. And you had other cases. So down at the bottom there, we have NASDAQ, JP Morgan. They were getting hacked. They had millions of records that were stolen. And these were very, very serious cyber criminal hacking cases that were more focused on, again, American citizens that they had to focus on. So, something like Mt. Gox didn't really pop the radar for the FBI other than just being observed. Now, kind of rolling into, 2012, 2013 timeframe, at the top here, you had Bitfloor, Bitcoinica. They lost, a very considerable amount of Bitcoin, 145,000 BTC lost between March and September of 2012. Now, if you look at kind of where law enforcement was, they were still, there was a document that was leaked after the ZooSpot case, the FBI ZooSpot case, if you guys remember that, another very big intrusion case there. And they were still kind of just seeing that Bitcoin was being used for illicit activity through ZooSpot, but they weren't really, again, paying attention to it. You had, down at the bottom again, you had Dropbox and Last.fm that just lost, almost combined 100 million records, and really FBI was focusing on those type of breaches. But when you pull into 2013, now you're talking FBI was actually taking action and really considering Bitcoin a method of transfer of value, because the Silk Road investigation was happening. FBI and Secret Service seized the Silk Road site. Dread Pirate Roberts was arrested. And, I think something like almost 100,000 Bitcoin was seized during that raid. And that was really a turning point, I think, for the government to say, hey, we have all this Bitcoin, what do we do with it? And you can see later in 2015, the Marshal Service actually had to auction off all those Bitcoins, if you guys remember that. Hopefully some of you got a chance to jump in on that. You probably made a lot of money. But the point is, the government was like, hey, what do we do with this money? We've seized this thing. It has some relative value. It's being used to buy illicit goods. And at this time, by this time, it was actually being used commercially as well, non-illicit activity. And the government was really, finally figuring out, all these different cases that they can bring related to Bitcoin. And FinCEN actually launched some guidance in 2013, which I think was really important to talk about money services businesses and virtual currencies, because it wasn't just cryptocurrency at the time. If you remember, Second Life and other, online multiplayer online games were transacting things like Linden, which were virtual currencies, and the government was paying attention to that as well. So it wasn't just cryptocurrency at the time. quickly, I wanted, there's just so much on this slide. I wish I could talk about all of it. But essentially, you can see, between 2012 and 2014, there was also some really major US breaches. You had Target that was breached. I worked that case with my colleagues. Sony was hacked by, North Korea at that time in 2014. So you're having these major intrusions that were happening on the law enforcement side, and they were really paying attention to those. They weren't, again, so much paying attention to the second Mt. Gox breach that happened and made them insolvent. 800,000 Bitcoin stolen from Mt. Gox. It was important, and the government was looking at it, but they weren't looking to go and do investigations around it. I'm sure someone looked at it. I don't know personally, but there still has never been any adjudication for the Mt. Gox breach, obviously. You could also see kind of, where law enforcement was going here in 2014. Silk Road 2.0 was a target, right? More of these online marketplaces in the dark web were popping up, and that's really where the government was focusing. They were really focusing on the really true illicit activity. They weren't really focusing on, the hacks of, legitimate exchanges that were occurring. And by the way, a lot of these exchanges too were not located in the United States. So people ask, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do these investigations? While they, had probably US persons' money in those organizations, it was very anonymous. People weren't coming forward necessarily and making complaints. And plus, these exchanges existed outside the jurisdiction of these other agencies. Outside the United States, FBI does have some ability, a lot of ability to prosecute through legal treaties between different countries, but it's a really long and arduous process, and they're really only going to do it for really large cases that are affecting a huge number of US citizens. So that's kind of, what was happening at the time. But, obviously the FBI and other federal government agencies were paying attention because of Silk Road. They were paying attention to Bitcoin and taking it very seriously about its transfer of value. Now, moving kind of into the middle, 2015, 2016, we're starting to see some really big hacks. We had Bitstamp getting hacked, Bitfinex, that's kind of second hack, lots of Bitcoin being stolen, hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin being stolen. And at the same time, if you look at the bottom here, and in terms of the kind of federal investigations, we counterintelligence agencies were starting to see these same nation state hackers use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies for transactions and supporting their operations. So you see here in the middle, the Russian GRU launched or laundered cryptocurrency to fund election meddling in 2016. That's been proven out, and they were later, and that was all came out later in the indictment in 2018. So you're seeing these kind of major players in the space using cryptocurrency, and I think this is really where another turning point in the federal government to really pay attention to what's happening in the cryptocurrency space was right around this time. So you can, if you really kind of look back at what I've already covered, the government had a little bit of a learning curve to kind of figure out what was going on, but now moving forward from 2016, you see like a more ramp up of investigations. But you got to remember, at the same time, you had the OPM breach, you had the Anthem breach. There were so many other breaches going on at the time that the government was also inundated with those commercial breaches as well. Now, keep moving forward here. We had the BitThumb hack, which was suspected to be the North Korean Lazarus group that did the Ubit and the BitThumb hacking cases. So again, that got government's attention. You have Secret Service jumping into some cases. You had the BTC exchange arrest of Alexander Vinnick, who they believed had some association with the Mt. Gox breach. So now the government's kind of catching on to some of these things and really starting to indict people and making arrests. And you can kind of see from 2018 to 2020 just the massive increase of hacks all around. So you at the top here you have CoinCheck, BitGrail, Bancor, BitThumb again, Binance, Upbit, all getting hacked. And then you have SEC launching FinHub in 2018, immediately after they fined Floyd Mayweather and DJ Khaled for unlawful touting of ICOs. This is kind of where SEC was stepping their foot in and protecting against these ICOs, these illegal ICOs. And then in 2019, which I think is really interesting, is DOJ indicted a New Jersey man for material support of Hamas, where he sent a $20 Bitcoin transaction to support the group. And when people come to me and they say, "Hey, what does the government focus on? Are they really going after the big people, or are they going after the small guy?" And what I really tell them, it totally depends. So obviously, you know, larger operations that are more impactful, the government likes to focus on those. But you get cases like this where, you know, you're doing material support to terrorism. Yes, the FBI is going to take a look at that. And yes, you know, supporting terrorists with any sort of monetary, you know, advancement will get you in trouble. So that's usually what I say to people. So, you know, kind of going quickly here because we don't have much time left. You know, and I'll again give this slide out so everybody can take a look at it. You had, you know, more recently BitClub getting indicted for wire fraud charges. SEC files a complaint against Telegram, which we all use, for unregistered securities. And then you have, you know, my favorite, which is, you know, SEC finds Steven Seagal for unlawful touting of B2G ICO. And then you get DOJ again starting to really step in and indicting nation state hackers for some of these exchange hacks. So the future is really that the government's paying attention, and they've really caught up to what's going on. So let's talk a little briefly. People always ask me, like, what do they focus on? So these are the different ways of getting in trouble with the government. Obviously, funding terrorism, that's probably at the top. If you're if you're doing that, you're gonna get looked at. Money laundering is probably one of the larger focuses. So people ask, you know, what about the exchange hacks and things of that nature? Really, they're looking at large-scale money laundering for nation states, for cartel groups, or organized crime, that sort of thing that are happening over cryptocurrencies. Those are really large focuses. Ponzi schemes, obviously, multi-level marketing schemes, and other kind of frauds that are related to that affect a lot of U.S. citizens. That's going to get you, you know, looked at. Hacking, obviously, you know, intrusion cases, intruding into exchanges or kind of, you know, into other people's environments or phones or whatever. You see all these kind of SIM swapping attacks and things that are happening. Any sort of market manipulation, that's going to get you, you know, on the radar of the SEC. And same with illegal broker dealer or touting of ICOs. So that's really what the government's focusing on currently. So in summary, you know, what's really happening is, you know, obviously breaches are on the rise, and it's happening so exponentially that I you know, even though the government's catching up, they're really running short on qualified personnel that can actually respond to some of these things. So, you know, the government's doing a really strong effort in recruiting people with technical backgrounds, like they did with me when they brought me in, and you'll see that continue. Regulators are absolutely responding. Your SEC is ramping up their FinHub, you know, investigations and their enforcement actions. FBI is doing the same. Other agencies, Secret Service. You're even getting DEA involved now with these kind of, you know, digital and virtual currency investigations. And law enforcement's getting a lot smarter. You know, they know how to track, you know, transactions. They know how to get through the mixing and things like that. They're able to track these things very, very well with tooling that they have available to them. We're absolutely going to have more regulation, you know, in the space in terms of, you know, digital and virtual currencies from the SEC. FinCEN and FINRA are all stepping in as well. You know, people that are tracking this, you know, are posting this stuff kind of daily in the space. And we're absolutely going to get more adoption. I think, you know, the government understands that digital currencies now have real value to them, and people want to use them because it's easier and safer in some cases. And so, you know, that's really what we're seeing, you know, from the federal government side. So what I'd like to do is, you know, I'd like to open it up for the last 5 minutes for any questions that we may have. And I'm going to go through the Ask a Questions and see if I can pull some stuff up. Someone asked, is the Fed hiring? Absolutely. Federal law enforcement officers are still hiring even through this, you know, pandemic. You know, it's It's a long process, but it's worth your time. I don't regret going into the government. I also don't regret coming out of the government. And I would support anybody on this call to join the forces if you like that. So one of the questions I always get about Silk Road. So I did have some my counter criminal investigative squad, because if you remember, I was working national security cases, actually did the Silk Road case. So I had a lot of insight into what happened there and the investigations. And in fact, they brought me in on a couple interesting things that were happening there. When everybody asks, was, Dread Pirate Roberts, Ross Ulbricht, and what I can tell you is I've seen the evidence with my own eyes. They caught him with his laptop open, logged into the platform as DPR, and found several, transactions and things on his laptop that are related. You can read all the indictment now; it's all fully disclosed. Was he the only one? I can't really answer that. There might have been other. I think there's already been proven that other people have logged in with that administrative, username and password. But he was definitely one of the maybe single persons or many persons that had access to that site. Another question here is, how do the feds think about the role of miners and validators as it relates to, are there any issues they are concerned with? This is a really interesting one because a lot of the miners are outside the jurisdiction of the United States federal government, right? They're mining in other countries where power and energy is really cheap. I think the government is paying attention, but I don't think they're really worried about like a 51% attack against Bitcoin. Like, I think, honestly, just being really honest, I think the government probably cares less about that than what's happening with the current financial crisis. So I don't think they've really stepped into, other than, if you're using, mining operations illegally or creating frauds, obviously there's been miners fined by the SEC. And actually some people arrested for doing illegal Ponzi scheme type things. Those are the things that the government cares about when it relates to miners and validators. One of the questions is, what are the challenges associated with getting convictions and usually using legally blessed tools, techniques as it relates to new tech for tracking down criminals, terrorists using crypto? So the challenge is that obviously, we have to, as a federal government, use the laws that exist, right? So a lot of people get charged with things like wire fraud, which has been a law, almost since the beginning of time. And wire fraud does fit, anytime you send an electronic communication via the wire, that could be internet, that can be ACH, that could be any sort of, transmission of that money, and it's used for fraudulent purposes, you can charge wire fraud. So that's really what you're seeing is a lot of these kind of money laundering operations or frauds are getting charged with that particular charge. There's nothing really specifically in the law about cryptocurrency. That's probably going to change in the future for digital assets, and they're adding kind of small changes to these laws to cover for those. So that's a challenge for federal law enforcement officers. Obviously, the tools and techniques and tracking is also a challenge.
All right, Jason, if you want to take just one last question, we need to transition to the next session.
Yeah, I think that is the last question that I had in the questions and answers. One user wanted me to post my slides online. I'll make sure I do that and send that out probably through SlideShare. All right, so thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and what a great conference you guys have put together, and I'll be following it for the rest of a couple of days. I also have another session on Monday, so I'd like to invite you guys in on that, on talking about the future of work and the gig economy and the future of contractors.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to